And we are live from the SIA global headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I am joined today by a very special guest. Of course, I am Don Erickson, CEO of the Security Industry Association. Welcome to the second edition of, yes, we do call it this, DonVersations, with special guest, Senior Director of Government Relations for SIA, Jake Parker. Jake, welcome.
Thank you, Don.
So, Jake, we'd like to start off for our global audience in a very lighthearted way. So, you've been with SIA for about 10 years. You've done an amazing job during that period, a number of accomplishments. We've got 2 or 3 very important announcements to make today. But why don't you just tell us 2 or 3 things about yourself and your background, your interests, just to familiarize yourself with people who may not be as familiar with you.
Well, Don, I guess to start with my background, where I came from, I spent about 10 years on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer. It was an amazing experience and certainly very interesting times you live in as far as what's going on in DC even this week. I actually remember, I'm happy the government is not shut down. I remember one of the things that happened when I was there was it was shut down for several weeks and it was not fun. So, but no, I'm happy to be with you here today, and definitely am excited to work for and on behalf of an industry that is so innovative and vibrant and has such an important mission of protecting people and property and sensitive information. It's been a very rewarding experience.
Great. And before we jump into a very important topic, so not the net. So that's good to know. All right, so Jake, I'm going to play a little word association with you to lead into our announcement. When I say BIPA,
first and really only biometric data privacy law of its kind. It was passed 15 years ago, and in the tech world, that might as well be the Stone Ages. So it is, while it was well-intentioned at the time, over time, it has become quickly outdated, and unfortunately, it's evolved to a point where instead of acting to protect people's rights, it's really become anti-consumer, I would argue, and it has been a way for class action lawyers to make a ton of money.
Okay. So one of the things that we hear about from our members all the time is they would like SIA to help, particularly mid and small companies, save them money, conducting research on and the various patchwork of laws that are out there, BIPA-like laws that are popping up around the country that we've been so aggressive on through your leadership.
Those systems. So we found is there's a lot of interest among members in learning more about what the requirements are, and certainly those who are involved in fielding such technologies are working with this information. But there is a difference amongst members as far as how they view laws in different states, what the requirements are, and then what their responses would be. And in some cases, as in the case of the Illinois BIPA law, that response might be simply not offer products or products with certain features in that jurisdiction, which is a real shame in many cases. So this has been to help kind of put all this information in one place, and probably most useful as a starting point for those looking at the issue, to know where they need to pay attention to and dive deeper.
Okay. So the value of the resource, this is really extraordinary. The value of the resource is that we're saving companies time from having to understand what the current laws are in various states as it relates to BIPA, and what
in the last couple of years since 2019, an increase in proposals in other states to replicate the law that Illinois has, which is something that's a great concern to the business community in general, not just our industry. And so far, those measures have failed, frankly. And even this last year, there was 12 states where similar legislation was proposed. It was rejected in all cases, so that continues the trend we've seen in the last couple of years. Where the business communities really come together to articulate what the issues have been with implementing Illinois' law and why we don't want to export that particular framework to other states.
Great.
And part of it, too, is that we are seeing a number of states now enact comprehensive data privacy laws that also include biometrics, which is definitely policy-wise a better way to go. So we've seen 8 states have now joined the ranks of a total of 13 just in 2023 in enacting these broad data privacy laws, which really makes the idea of having a separate biometric law unnecessary.
Exactly. So, Jake, when members receive this publication, this guide, on October 17th, we're going to make it available the morning of Securing New Ground in New York. And I hope to see many of you who are tuning in today at the Securing New Ground conference. The one takeaway from them is that they're going to be better prepared to understand what the requirements are today in certain states, right? And to also anticipate potential legislation that's going to be enacted.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So that's our first announcement. Our second announcement related during this Identity Week pertains to facial recognition. And I, again, want to call out Jake and Colby Williams for all their efforts and their dedication to combating a number of anti-FR proposals at a local level, state level, and even on the federal side of things for many, many months. And they have a very strong record of success on behalf of our members. But Jake, talk to me about what's going to complement this biometric guide. So our second announcement is a second resource that's coming out for those in the identity space, and that pertains to FR. And tell us more about that.
Right. So this is really in response to it puts information about laws that specifically have to do with facial recognition all in one place where it can be utilized. And so, part of this is there's a, I think, misperception of how much legislating there is on this out there. It's actually been very limited. We only saw, for example, in 2023, earlier this year, we only saw, I think, 3 states that had legislation specifically introduced to address facial recognition specifically. But there's a number of states that do have laws on the books, but they are so wildly different from each other. Having a resource will help folks like this will help folks sort all that out. And one thing to note here, interesting for folks, is that there aren't any states that have laws that restrict or regulate facial recognition for private sector applications. And that's definitely a misconception sometimes we encounter out there. There's a number of states that have regulated public sector uses of the technology, and at times only including law enforcement among those. But that's part of there's a lot of nuance involved in different proposals that will help flesh out.
So what we're staying true to for our members, right, are putting out compelling resource guides in the area of biometrics, coming out this fall. Those are part of a series of government relations publications that are coming out that we can talk about potentially another time. But Jake, also what I think our members need to understand is that our advocacy extends beyond the United States, right, on FR and biometrics. Talk, if you can, for a minute about the AI Act in the EU. Then I want to pivot back to a pending matter before the courts.
Yeah, so what's going on right now in the EU regarding the AI Act is there. The final, the way the process works there, where they hope to finalize what the new law is going to be by the end of this year. And so far, there is quite a difference between the Parliament's version and what the Council, the member states, basically analogous to our Senate, what they proposed. And so they're working through those differences now. This could significantly impact security technologies, not just biometrics, but certainly including that in a number of ways. I think the most important thing that we're focused on now and advocating on is the what they call the Article 5 section, which is what technology or applications of AI technology are actually completely prohibited versus regulated under the various mechanisms there. And so, unfortunately, what we've seen is in some cases, biometrics are included in those prohibited categories just based on how the technology works, without any relation to what it's being used for, which is the key. And so, we've been working with a number of our members that have a presence in the EU and other allied associations on these matters, but it'll be very key to watch what comes out of that process, most likely in November, as far as what the final agreement will look like.
Okay. Jake, what is, back in the States, when I mentioned the name Zelda, what does that mean to you?
So we just talked about Google law. So important here is
how the law is being interpreted, not just what it said 15 years ago. And so this has evolved. There's been, for example, significant change in how these cases are looked at after the White Castle decision you may have heard of, where court decided that the damages could be potentially awarded on a per scan basis versus other bases. And White Castle, due to this issue that happened with their, or allegation regarding their biometrically opened cash registers, could put them on the hook for billions of dollars in fines with a B. So that has changed a lot of things and also impacted the BIPA reform effort, which I want to mention. But the Zelmer case is one in which there was a positive and sensible decision out of the Ninth Circuit, but it's on appeal. It could be changed, and it's something that could impact even access control systems that are currently fielded under the BIPA rules. And that's because it even though it has to do with Facebook and their photo tagging features, the outcome will determine to what extent it's permitted to distinguish between users of a system and non-users, which is critical for access control applications of biometrics. And so we actually recently submitted a amicus brief, which is a friend of the court's brief, explaining our support for the decision that was made that would basically clarify the situation with respect to access control systems in particular. It'll continue to operate under the BIPA rules.
Jake, what else is on the horizon in the States as it relates to BIPA?
So one recent interesting development is last week we saw an announcement for the New York Department of Education. They made a determination regarding biometrics use in K-12 schools. And this is something that they were empowered by state legislation and had been in effect since 2020 that actually completely banned all biometrics uses in the K-12 setting until a determination was made otherwise by the commissioner. So now, after a process that's occurred almost 3 years later, that determination has been made. And we'd worked throughout this process. This is really similar to our position on these matters in other places too, is that a blanket ban on technology is really not the appropriate way to address concerns about how they might be used. It needs to be specific to, if there's specific concerns, those need to be addressed narrowly and specifically with regulations. And so in this case, we had argued that, along with allies in the education field and members, that there should not be a blanket restriction on biometrics, especially things that are very commonplace throughout the nation, like using fingerprint technology to identify a student for food service accounts or other things, medication administration, other things at schools. Really no reason to throw out beneficial use cases in such a blanket fashion. And so basically what they determined last week was that they lifted the blanket ban on biometrics and basically lets each school in New York decide what the appropriate uses are. And of course, they're already subject to very strict student data privacy regulations. But unfortunately, they did extend and keep basically the ban on facial recognition technology in particular. And they left that open to change in the future. And so this, again, is one of those situations where I think we know from Hollywood and from some examples in other parts of the world, there's certain uses of facial recognition that we wouldn't want to see in schools. But at the same time, there's significant safety and security value from using it in a very limited and targeted way. For example, the case that prompted the legislation and the issue in New York was a school district that had used a state grant to purchase technology that in part performed facial matching at entrances of schools, but only for screening adult visitors against a list of people that had already been adjudicated as prohibited from entering school grounds, such as folks that are in sex offenders that live locally and others. All this type of system does is basically augment the capabilities that the security staff already have, and they already have the responsibility to make sure prohibited individuals don't come on school property. This basically helps them do that, and they, in fact, were able to use that successfully several times to flag those individuals. So you can easily see the security value of having something like that, where when we look at cases where there's attacks on schools from outsiders that are not part of the student population, often those individuals are known to the officials ahead of time. And there could be utility in having that type of capability in place to flag those individuals and possibly respond to an incident before it develops further.
Well, and I think that's a great overview. I appreciate it. I don't want to leave our audience with any misconceptions about SIA's commitment to privacy. So I can recall going back to 2008, drafting with the involvement of Kathleen Carroll, who was very involved in our government relations committee at that time, SIA privacy principles that became part of a SIA privacy framework, which you did a great job of updating over the years. So although we have a very clear position on onerous BIPA proposals around the country and certainly don't want to see anything similar on a federal side, on a very proactive level as well, we are extremely committed to responsible privacy policies as evidenced through our privacy framework, further evidenced by the fact that SIA provided a number of resources related to GDPR implementation and analysis several years ago. We have a data privacy advisory board that is chaired by Teresa Wu from IDEMIA, who's a member of the SIA board of directors. So not to be lost on people is how effectively SIA strikes that balance between being a privacy advocate in a responsible way, while at the same time trying to ensure the responsible and ethical use of biometrics technology, which is, I mean, all intents and purposes, part of our message, or at least the core of our message. Is that right?
That's right. You know, these technologies can be implemented in a privacy protective way, and I would argue that if used correctly, they are actually privacy protective. So by using biometrics, for example, you can verify your identity without sharing the type of personal information that could be easily compromised by someone who gets a hold of it.
Here's what's exciting, right? And Jay, you and I feel the same way about this. Anytime we can deliver value through SIA, it's motivating for everybody. And that's why we're with an association as innovative and forward-thinking as SIA, and so glad that you're leading our government relations efforts. The bottom line is this, I mean, for our audience today. Number one, our members are getting a great new resource on understanding BIPA requirements as they exist today and may exist tomorrow. Secondly, we're getting a resource later this fall by ISC East. No greater platform to produce this and make it available than before the community in New York at ISC East, related to facial recognition statutes and how they look in a similar way. Lastly, I think everyone here today found how much of a command that Jake has over these policy issues. And I think we always encourage our members to get involved in our government relations committee activities, engage with Jake, engage with Colby. And with that in mind, as we're starting to wrap up here, Jake, how does a company or an individual from a company get involved in our advocacy efforts? Number one. Number two, or just receive information about the state legislation that we're following as it relates to BIPA or facial recognition or one of the many dozens of other issues that you're involved in on a daily basis?
I will certainly, reach out to us and let us know you're interested. we have a government relations committee that meets several times a year. And within that, we have a number of working groups that are working on very specific tasks and very specific issues within that issue set. And so, facial recognition being one of them. So definitely encourage you to get in touch with us. And we're definitely looking to partner with members in the various states where they're located. As we've all seen a lot of gridlock in Washington. And as a result, there is relatively more potential happening on the policy front at the state level. And so we have been, over the course of several years, expanding our efforts at the state and local level. Definitely could use help as far as members coming alongside us and doing some of that outreach.
So, no, thank you, Jake. I think our advocacy efforts are also due to the active involvement of our members. And I think the global security community has noticed over the years how much the complexion of SIA has changed in terms of diversifying our membership and bringing in different components of the security ecosystem, different modes of security technology that are being offered in the marketplace. And with that in mind, I do want to recognize, as we close out, two companies on reaching important milestones for SIA. First is NEC, who's very involved in government relations, Jake, as you know. They are now been a member for 5 continuous years. Appreciate their active involvement. And I also want to again mention Teresa Wu's company, IDEMIA, who has been a member consistently for 15 years and greatly value the involvement of Teresa and her colleagues, of course, those colleagues from NEC as well and their entire team among the companies who are reaching milestones with us. So very excited to have these companies involved. Thrilled by the outputs that are coming out of the government relations department. Very impressed by the outpouring we have today in terms of the size of the audience who is tuned in. And before I announce when our next episode will be, Jake, do you have any closing thoughts in the area of biometrics and BIPA?
Well, just that today is actually the 15th anniversary, so it's definitely one reason why we're focused on this topic. But certainly enjoy working with members on this issue and continue to do that.
Well, and as you point out, it's a method to our madness, marking that 15 years. So with that said, this has been great. Always collaborating with Jake is a great experience. And please stay tuned for the next episode of DonVersations with a special external guest in 2 weeks that I'll be sharing very soon. And if you have any suggestions for guests in the future, be sure to send me a note or drop me a private message in LinkedIn. With that, Jake, thanks for all your work on these publications, and we look forward to sharing them with members in the coming days. Thanks, everybody.